No. No, yeah. When the bill hits the floor.
Yes. Just say that when it's passed, you put those on the supplemental.
You're getting that. Good morning. Y'all bow with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, again we come asking you to forgive us of our sins, to ask you to lead, guide, and direct us, to give us some modicum of sense in this building. Let us do things that please you. I ask these things in my Savior's name. Amen. Let me just get y'all kind of started. There will be a supplemental rules calendar later on in the morning. I know that y'all think that it's probably impossible, but I messed up yesterday. I did one thing in front of another which I should not have done. I should have done the other one in front of, and that is the amendment and the rules substitute to 170. So we will come back in here, and what will be done on that bill is there will be a motion to redo, and how we're going to redo is I will add the amendment first, which y'all have all voted out of here, and then I will do the rules substitute second. We have to do that so all our little numbers line up. And that keeps it clean and keeps me from having this be a total waste of time, which I sometimes think it is. Y'all, it's 20 minutes after 9. I don't think I want to hear any of you. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, since we're bringing House Bill 170 back in here, I would like to just a recommendation to extend the debate time from 1 hour to 2 hours.
The one that's going to be set, that gets it to 1 hour and 40 minutes. It's 20 front and 20 back, and that's in my opinion, that's enough, and that's the way it's going to be.
Now you're saying how much time, Mr. Chairman?
The hour doesn't include the opening or the closing statements.
Okay.
So it's an hour. It's 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I got a letter I need to read. It may take a little time to do it, so if I have that much time on the floor. So
your opportunity is you'll sign up like everybody else that wants to, and you'll be given the full allotment of time that he doles out to each person.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a slow reader too. So.
You're certainly not slow to ask questions.
God, yes. Where's your fan?
All right, Ms. Tankersley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you today House Bill 314. We're working off a substitute LC 362723S. is fifth from the bottom on the first page. The purpose of this bill is to combine the State Board of Barbers and the State Board of Cosmetology. This bill is a product of 2 years of discussions between these two boards to merge, and it's being done at the request of the Secretary of State's office. Also, this is a recommendation that came from a study committee that I served on in 2013, Professional Licensing Boards. This bill simply moves parts of the Barber Act into the Cosmetology Act, and it makes the language consistent between the two professions. There are a few new additions, all of which are agreed to by both boards. The additions streamline the licensing process, therefore putting Georgians back to work faster and uses state resources more effectively. I ask for your favorable consideration of this bill.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you. Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I have House Bill 289. It's on the last page of your calendar there. And all this bill does is extend by 1 year to June 2016 an exemption on motor tax fuel for mass transit vehicles and campus transportation systems, or mass transit systems and campus transportation systems. It's an exemption that's already in place. It's just extending the sunset by 1 year.
Any questions, Mr. Parsons, on 289? How about 201? Did you?
Yes, Chairman, I want to mention 201, which I'd mentioned, brought in before. That's a bill that has to do with PSC, a program that they administer to get equipment to deaf and hard of hearing people. I think there may have been some question about the PSC and how I just talked to Bill Edge from PSC just before I came in here, and they said they have no opinion, they have no feeling one way or another about it. In order for them to do what needs to be done and get the wireless equipment, the legislation needs to be passed, and they're not opposed to it, of course.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one that I asked for yesterday, and I've got two new ones, if I may. The first one that I asked for yesterday, House Bill 296, would be extending the special needs scholarship to a very identifiable and small group of refugee students who have extreme English speaking needs. It would be the ESOL provision there for them. 296. Oh. I'm sorry. That is on page 3, the third one down. My bad.
Mr. Wendell has instructed the rest of y'all. Okay. Any questions, Mr. Nix, on 296? No questions.
Okay. If I may, on page 4, the third one down, House Bill 369. This is a fairness bill to determine how the eSPLOST is distributed. Right now, an independent system within a county system can refuse to let an eSPLOST go forward if they don't agree to a split of the money. This would just say that in the absence of an agreement, it would go forward based on a per FTE or per student basis. House Bill 369.
No questions. Thank you.
And the last one, House Bill 374, is a one-word add to a bill to make sure that forestry equipment on a dealer's lot is exempt from the ad valorem tax. That was the intent of the bill early, but the word forestry does not appear and is not being honored for them. That's the fourth one down on page 3.
Mr. Weldon.
Mr. Chairman, to Chairman Nix, in 374, where farm equipment held for sale in dealer inventory.
Where are you?
House Bill 374. I'm right here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Now, does that apply to all farm equipment, or is it just for forestry equipment?
Farm equipment's already being exempted. Forestry equipment, which was intended to be, is not. So the word forestry did not appear, even though they described the equipment. And now, by putting forestry in there, it will be exempted.
Thank you. Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Hightower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 bills today, if that's all right, and I'll start with number 1's under modified open, second from the bottom, first page. HB 347. HB 347, what it does is just clarifies the law in the domestic code, says that no one can collect interest on an alimony judgment or decree unless a judge orders it, or unless the payment is past 30 days or is past 30 days past due. There were attorneys that were trying to collect interest on alimony judgments that had not been decreed through the court, which was not normal practice, and so we're just clarifying that.
Real good bill. Others?
Yes, sir. If you go same page, modified open, sixth up from the bottom, HB 304. This is the one I presented to you a couple times before. This deals with clarifying a procedure in the criminal justice packet. This was where courts were essentially saying that mandatory probated sentences that had a mandatory term of probation, they were saying that even if it fell in the middle of a consecutive sentence, they had to honor that. So essentially, someone was sentenced to 20 years to serve when in that 20 years they had 1 year mandatory probation and then another 20 years with a mandatory year of probation. They were interpreting the law to say after 19 years of the first sentence, they'd let them out for a year and then rearrest them for them to go back in for the remainder of the 19. And this simply says that's not what we ever meant. The mandatory probated sentences come at the end of all the time that they've served in jail. And then, Mr. Chairman, last bill, if I may, is under modified structure. It's on the third page, fifth down from the top. And this is HB 303. Mr. Chairman, this is, I would like to categorize this as a consumer protection bill. This deals with uninsured motorist bad faith coverage. As it stands right now, if an insurance company, and this is dealing with your own insurance company, not someone else, but your own insurance company, if they are found to have acted in bad faith towards you and not honored a policy, current penalties for them. Now, this is a court or jury has found them to have acted in bad faith. The current law says that they're only penalized 25% of the underlying policy. And so what this bill does is it changes that penalty to give them a little more encouragement to act in good faith with their consumers, and it ups that to $25,000 or 25%, whichever is greater. And the reason we did that percentage is because a lot of the abuse is done at the lower level minimum insurance policies. And so at a $25,000 policy right now, which is the state required minimum, the penalty right now is only $6,250, which is relatively nothing to an insurance company. Under this law, if they treated that consumer badly, the new law would say their penalty would be $25,000, which is 100% penalty on the smaller cases. However, if it's a $100,000 policy or more, it would stay under current law, because current law is 25%. And so that's why the $25,000 or 25%, whichever is greater, takes care of those low-end policies, which is where most of the abuse is happening. So any policy under $100,000 would be protected.
Can I give a word of warning to the rest of you? If you want the rest of your cohorts to be able to explain their bills, I might be a little quicker than that.
I apologize.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hightower, who are you saying is acting in bad faith? Who are you saying is the bad faith person? Is it me, the insured, or the insurance company?
In this situation, it would be your insurance company, because you have actually put them on notice of your demand, and they acted in bad faith and did not provide your policy as required, as under your contract. And a court, a judge or jury would have actually had to have found your insurance company acted in bad faith against you for this to happen.
Against me, the insured?
Against you, the customer, the person who's been paying them the premiums. That's correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
That's why I say it's a consumer protection bill.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Belton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you House Bill 103, Kelsey's Law. It's on the second page under modified structure rules, the fifth one down. It merely states we're trying to protect teenage girls from having their personal information on a pornographic website.
Mr. Belton, you've come on that bill how many times?
5 times, sir.
You've paid the price. No questions. We'll probably see you sometime in the next 3 days. You don't have to come back.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May it please the committee, I have 2 bills under modified structure. The first is the very first bill on page 3, House Bill 280. This bill does 2 simple things. It adds to the sex offender registry list those convicted of sexual servitude under the human trafficking statute. And the second thing it does, it clarifies for law enforcement and prosecutors that jurisdiction is concurrent when a sex offender moves from one county to the next and does not register as required by law.
Any questions? No questions. Next one.
My second bill, Mr. Chairman, is House Bill 196, which is on page 2. It's the 6 up from the bottom. It changes current code section 17-8-57 to treat a trial and error of a judge's comment on the evidence consistent with how we treat every other error at trial on appeal.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Broderick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you this morning HB 277, which is at the bottom of page 3. And this is an industry bill, and what it does is extend a 2008 action by the General Assembly as it relates to use tax for flooring samples. What we do is we change in that bill the word carpet samples to all flooring samples, and I brought an audiovisual aid this morning. What we're talking about is hard surface samples, which include tile, laminate, vinyl, and so forth. And then the industry right now, there are about 26,000 Georgians that work in the industry and up to 75,000 in related support jobs related to the industry. And the sales of the industry are about $20 billion a year. And I understand from the Port Authority that flooring is one of the major exporters that we've got from the port. I would ask your favorable consideration of 277. It's an industry bill. What we're doing is we're treating these samples the same as we do for carpet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's no questions.
No questions. Thank you. I'm missing something in here. I can't hear him or anybody else up there for the committee. Hold her down. They got a right for you to listen to them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 bills for your consideration today. The first one is
Mr. Dollar, you can come speak to us now.
I saw your point. All right, we'll start now. First one is one that y'all have heard before. It's HB 245. It's dealing with condo assessment fees. The second is on the second page, HB 540. And I chair Interstate Cooperation, which is the only committee in the House that's statutorily created. I was looking something up else in the code and noticed that when they were created in the House and Senate, it said that each committee shall consist of 5 members. We currently have 12, so this is a little cleanup language so that the House and Senate are in compliance.
Any questions, Mr. Dollar, on either one? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to ask for HB 253. It's on the middle of the first page. Basically, it gives real estate appraisers the right to appeal to the real estate commissioner here in the state of Georgia. Second bill is HB 268. It's at the very bottom of page 2. Basically, it clarifies mandatory reporting language, state of Georgia.
She's sick. There's no questions. Thank you, Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you.
Mr. Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick bills today. First one is on page 1, last under open rule, H.R. 473, a joint study committee with the Senate, studying cybersecurity, how we can protect our government from attacks, and also look at what the technology and things like Fort Gordon are doing to add this industry to Georgia. Second bill was from yesterday. It's page 2. The first one under modified structure, the Georgia Right to Try Act, giving more options for experimental drugs and therapies to terminally ill patients.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I bring before you today House Bill 278. It's on page 1, 15th bill down. And it just simply is just transferring from the Department of Labor to the Department of Insurance and Fire Safety the responsibilities of the Public Employee Hazardous Chemical Protection Act. And I have letters from both departments saying that they are in full support of it.
Any questions of Ms. Clark, since this is his first time here? Y'all can abuse him, it's okay. No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, seventh one down, under modified structure, HB 114. I've asked for it a couple of times. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and I believe that Chairman Willard may be having an amendment on it also.
No questions, thank you.
you.
Ms. Beskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today to ask for favorable consideration on House Bill 297, which is number 3 on the first page under open rule. It relates to professional licensing boards, and I've appeared a couple of times on this bill and would request the favorable consideration.
No questions there. Next. Whoa. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative right here. Are we only doing this for the one board? You keep mentioning architects. Is this something they want, or the other 39 boards, do they want it too?
I've heard from members of other boards that they don't oppose this. They would like it. It actually was brought at the request of the Secretary of State, and he was urged to do this by the Board of Architects. But I do believe that the Secretary of State believes it would benefit all the member boards.
Okay, so this, Mr. Chairman, if I can ask one more. So this is the American professional boards that you keep talking about. There's an architect board, a national board that only deals with 50 states and no provinces, right?
I don't know the answer to that. We're talking about a National Association of Licensing Boards, so to the extent Puerto Rico might be covered by that, I don't know that it's just 50 states, but it is a National Association of Licensing Boards.
Okay. One further question, Mr. Chairman. So this mainly is brought by the Secretary of State for this one board, is that?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Next one. Any others?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If everyone will look on their back of their first page under modified structure rule, House Bill 169, I would request the committee's favorable consideration. The bill simply allows tax commissioners in counties where emissions are required to extend a 30-day temporary tag to those citizens who are working to comply with the law.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Page 3, second bill under structured rule is HB 81, which attempts to tackle the super lien problem. This is an issue where small lien holders that do not have a lien against a property can potentially foreclose against a tax sale property within 3 months. We are seeking to extend that to 300 days to allow first mortgage holders as well as anybody that has an ownership interest in the property to get square. And it also sets in time a tax levy date as the point in time where we're going to set the clock on this. And restricts it to those who have a valid judgment creditor status.
What was the number on that one again, Mr. Turner? Okay. No questions, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Pizzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Page 2, modified structured, House Bill 93. This bill simply addresses the data collected using license plate readers that you'll commonly find on the back of law enforcement vehicles. It simply states that if an individual has not been convicted or suspected of any crime or is not the subject of any investigation, their license plate data and the geo-tracking that accompanies them must be purged after 90 days.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 3, Structured Rule, HB 94. The original genesis of this bill was to give relief to members of the military who oftentimes deregister their vehicles while they're deployed. We discovered that usually local taxing authorities do not bill for ad valorem taxes when a vehicle is deregistered, so this would relieve members of the military from having to pay penalties on unpaid ad valorem taxes, again, which have not been billed. As it came through committee, there was a desire to extend it to any vehicle that had been voluntarily deregistered, such as when someone is restoring an automobile and it is off the road for a period of years.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Right on the first page, middle of the page, under modified open, HB 267 just makes clear that to record a security deed in our state, it must be signed by a notary public and a witness.
Thank you. No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. If I may, I have 3 bills to request. On the bottom of page 1, House Bill 385, pertaining to health records that OPB currently looks over. We're seeking to move that responsibility to Department of Community Health.
No questions, just next one.
HB 386 is repealing the mandate of collection of data and reporting, dealing with rural and human service transportation. Top of the page 2.
Any questions? No questions. Next one.
And lastly, sir, House Bill 319 dealing with the ratification of the gas tax executive order. 319. HB 319. Back of the page. I'm sorry. Last page, Chairman Willard.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you, Mr. Nimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 439 on page 2 at the top under modified open. This is the New Markets tax credit program. It's a federal program. A lot of our neighboring states have their state side to this. It's got great success about using insurance premium tax credits to raise investments to help capital reach underserved and rural areas.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here once again for HB 115 on the modified open on page 1. It simply allows some of your constituents to avoid foreclosure. I'm also here to ask for HB 515 under modified structure, page 3. It simply formalizes and incorporates what most believe to be the case anyway, that is the city of Tucker.
Where's the one for La Vista Hills?
Not my constituents, Mr. Chair.
Any questions, Mr. Mitchell? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring two bills before your consideration today. On page 3, HB 358, the Legislative Oversight Committee for State Contracts, a committee to be established to be able to review any contract signed by any state agency or department. On the last page, page 4, HB 457, this bill once again establishes the exemption of ad valorem tax for boats and stock.
Have we had that last one before? Is that something that's been around?
No, sir. This is the first time I've brought this.
Okay. I can't hear you. Try again.
It's extending the sunset.
It's extending the okay. Which one was it? How long does it extend it?
It removes the sunset.
Removes
We've had
the
this
sunset.
before.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I've got 19 things going on over here, Lee, and forgot you. Ms. Dickerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I come before you with House Bill 131, the End the Cyberbullying Act. It just adds cyberbullying to the existing law. Page 2, modified structure, and it's halfway down the page. House Bill 131. I ask for your favorable consideration.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Prince.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 1, up on the modified open, the second bill down, House Bill 16. House Bill 16 grants high school students that attend magnet schools the opportunity to participate in high school athletics. It comes under 3 conditions. One, that they participate in the local school in which they're zoned for. That's if their school does not have that sport. 2 is that they can only participate in one school during that school year. And the 3rd is that the local school boards have the authority to grant this waiver.
Any questions, Mr. Prince? Thank you. Mr. Bruce.
Mr. Chairman, I checked in early to see if I could make this request from the yellow sheet, as I was sick yesterday and could not get to your office to make this request for House Bill 514, which allows the citizens of South Fulton County to be able to vote as to whether or not they want to become their own city. It's House Bill 514.
It does what to South Fulton again?
I'm sorry?
Tell me what it did. I missed it.
It allows for the citizens to vote as to whether they would like to become the city of South Fulton.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're gonna give me some help on this one? Yeah. Mr. Flood.
Yeah.
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring for you one measure. It's on page 2, modified open, House Bill 476 is a companion to the bill that was just presented, House Bill 514. It allows an annexation of Fulton Industrial into the proposed city of South Fulton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Rules Committee. I bring House Bill 492, easy to find, it's the very last one on your blue sheet. We heard this in public safety as it's structured. This bill clarifies the probate judge's role as it relates to the renewal of a Georgia weapons license. It clarifies some terms and allows counties and cities to regulate citizens who volunteer in their programs. Probate Judges Council, ACC, GMA, Georgia Carry, all agree.
Any questions, Mr. Jaspers? Thank you.
Also have, if I may, Mr. Chairman, House Bill 512, modified structure on page 3. This is for it's kind of mislabeled, but it's for the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. It's a reorganization bill. It really codifies things that they're doing right now to the lawsuit and making sure that they can deliver the services those need them as they need them. Thank you, sir.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Clark. Ms. Clark, sorry. I've got two other of those folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen of this committee. I bring House Bill 436, which is on page 3 under modified structured. This is a bill when physicians are first in caring for pregnant women. They have a conversation at the very beginning and at the end of pregnancy about testing for HIV. This would include testing for syphilis because it is on the rise in Georgia, and it includes the 3rd trimester because women are not seeking medical aid until later in their pregnancy. This is brought to us by the Department of Community Health and the AIDS Coalition.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Buckner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am asking for your consideration on H.R. 303, page 1, open rule, the 5th bill down. This is an urging resolution for the Board of Education to beef up civics education. They do a really good job about the legislative process, but there's some need and interest in trying to improve the judicial section of civics education.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here to ask for House Bill 237, page 2, third from the bottom, under modified structured. This bill originally the bill asked for a 5-year extension of the angel investor tax credit, but we have on your desk a friendly amendment to limit that to a 3-year extension of the credit.
Any questions, Mr. Williamson? Thank you. Mr. Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, here to ask for HB 120. It's on the second page under structured rule, basically allowing the local counties and municipalities to add to their SPLOST list state-owned facilities. And again, as Chairman Powell explained during the last committee meeting, currently they're doing this now. This would remove a lot of red tape if we could include this language that we're adding.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 3, structured rule, the last bill standing that I have, House Bill 215, which is the host bill that affects only DeKalb County and has the support of all DeKalb legislators.
Questions, Mr. Jacobs? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. A. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add
HB 310. This is part of the Governor's Criminal Justice Reform Act. This creates the Department of Community-Based Supervision by unplugging sections out of Department of Pardon and Parole's Probation Act from under the Department of Corrections, certain personnel from under Juvenile DJJ, and then transfers all the personnel, assets, and such as that for the creation of this new division. The other part of this bill that's of very much importance comes from the recommendations of the Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform that deals with misdemeanor probation. Last year, because of litigation, the system had pretty well been scrapped. Legislation was passed, was subsequently vetoed last year. This comes back from the Council on Criminal Justice Reform, the Governor's office, and all the stakeholders of curing those problems. There's about 10 different areas that needed to be dealt with, and that's exactly what's in this bill.
Tell me about the amendment.
There is an amendment that came to us from the Council on Criminal Justice Reform that clarified. Let's see if I can find it.
Y'all, it's AM 292374 EC.
Yes, sir. This came to us yesterday from the council as further clarification, and this deals with the pay-only probation. Under the language that's in the bill, if a misdemeanant was to basically pay for just a fine only under that type of supervision, and if that changed, if the status of that changed, and they couldn't pay the fine, and if the judge, once it goes back to the court, and if the judge determines he can restore the original language permitting the probation provider to go back, and then he can then pay the supervision fees only when the judge converts a fine back to community service, requiring community service to be monitored by one of these companies.
Mr. Weldon.
To the Chairman Powell and to the Chairman of this committee, I'm a large objection to this amendment because the amendment allows for a probationer that has already paid out their fees, but their sentence is not completed to be changed or converted to a sentence that requires community service in addition to further fees. And I'm lodge my objection on those grounds.
If I may. If I might, sir, I respectfully disagree with that analogy. As I understand it, if the judge, if the court had already determined that it was a pay-only violation, and then at some point that it's determined that the defendant or that the misdemeanant could not pay, then it sets it back. The court can set it back into the motion so that then they'll be under the supervision of whatever the probation provider is, and then they would be able to have to pay those if it's monitoring, if these providers are doing monitoring. So it's only, to me, it just reads that it's if they cannot pay, which means that they have not been able to live up to the terms, and then they've gone back to the court, and it leaves it into the hands of the court.
I tell you what, I didn't mean, since I hadn't brought the amendment to hear the yays and the nays, I'm going to stop it right there, right now. Mr. Ramsey.
On behalf of Chairman Cooper, who's under the weather, I'm asking for House Bill 505. It's under modified structure. It's the third from the bottom among the modified structure bill. This is the result of a lot of work and negotiation between the orthopedic doctor community and the physical therapist. It gives physical therapists a very limited window of time where they can treat a patient without having to that patient go to the doctor and get a referral. It passed unanimously out of health, and all the interested parties are on board.
Any questions? Okay. Mr. Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, two bills. HB 271 on the first page, middle of the modified open rule. That's the charter in the workplace legislation. It simply has no effect on funding. It simply gives the authority to local school boards and the commission to authorize charter schools in the workplace. Those are schools where a community business of ours might want to furnish a facility, for example, for a charter school. Simply allows the local boards to give an enrollment priority for those businesses.
Next one.
Also, Mr. Chairman, HB 182, middle of the second page, middle of modified structured. HB 182 deals with the issue of forced blood draws for DUI arrests. You know, for decades, we've always allowed folks to refuse a breathalyzer test and then lose their license for a year. The practice of forcibly drawing blood from people has emerged in our state. This allows forced blood draws to happen for vehicular homicide. If the driver kills somebody or seriously injures and puts them in the hospital, you can draw blood. But for normal DUI arrests, the ability to refuse a breathalyzer would be in place moving forward.
Mr. Powell, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for favorable consideration of House Bill 375. It's on the third page, about midway down. This is a bill that allows for a no-low plea to not result in a suspension of driver's license on the plea to a suspended, canceled, or revoked registration. This brings this consistent with what happens on DUIs, driving with a suspended license, reckless driving, but for this particular charge, a plea of no-low under current law counts as a conviction and results in immediate suspension of driver's license.
Any questions? Ms. Dempsey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask for consideration for House Bill 288. Comes as a department request from DBHDD to add 2 more members to their coordinating council that meets quarterly, with those appointments being made by the governor.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm coming to ask for favorable consideration for 2 bills on page 2 under modified structure, and about midway through the page, House Bill 154, just to bring parity between the magistrate and probate courts, and then also almost fourth bill from the bottom, House Bill 212, which is to clarify CRNA function.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, I come to ask for House Bill 510, which sets up the basic framework for the Sports Commission Fund, and the provisions there within it comes under 1 Georgia. And I'd also like to put my name beside House Bill 457, finally get the boats treated the same way that autos are when it comes to ad valorem inventory tax.
What was the last one on?
457, Hawkins bill.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring for you House Bill, or substitute to House Bill 397, LC 400868S. Many of you have heard over the session regarding the Georgia soil and water issues that are going on. This bill seeks to correct some of those issues. We think we've done it in a very responsible way that keeps Georgia soil and water together, but also addresses the issues that have been brought up. One of those is the issue of zero-based budgeting. While we believe the Georgia Water should stay together, we're only going to price it up under the Department of Ag for administrative purposes. The appointments will be still made from the conservation districts, but they'll be at large, meaning that the governor may appoint folks, the best folks. We still believe he's going to pick from look at the supervisors, but may pick from without those supervisors to make sure we get the very best and knowledgeable folks on the board. It takes out a funding provision that was put in under the Purdue administration for funding reservoirs that's no longer needed. It also gives, I think, the heart of the bill gives some structure and some guidance on our green book, the erosion control manual, which is very vital to the state in protecting our waters, our environment. It sets some very basic guidelines, defining the manual as a published guidance and setting some overall principles, and also provides for a approval process through an existing body, the Erosion and Sediment Control Council, which is made up of appointments from the governor, and the lieutenant governor, and members of the DOT and State Road and Toll Authority. We believe this is the most responsible way to take care of the issues that have occurred over the past year or so with Georgia Soil and Water.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, in the middle of the page, under modified structured House Bill 377, I explained that bill yesterday. It simply allows for our courts to continue to use private entities to collect people who fail to pay their fines. I have one other, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Under modified open on the first page, first bill, House Bill 3. This is what some have referred to as the Todd Gurley bill. Many of you know that there was a star running back at the University of Georgia named Todd Gurley who probably would have won the Heisman Trophy, but he signed some autographs for a memorabilia dealer. That dealer not only paid him to do it, but then turned him into the media to the highest bidder. We already have laws on our books in Georgia that allow universities to go after people who basically mess with their student athletes. This simply adds this memorabilia dealer to the list of people that they can go after, and also allows it to be a misdemeanor like it is in the current law for other such offenses.
Any questions? No questions? Mr. Willard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to put my name beside my dear friend Mr. Kelly's bill, HB 267, as favorable consideration by the committee.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would like to ask favorable consideration of H.R. 303 by Representative Buckner, HB 16 by Representative Prince, and HB 89 by Representative Bruce.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for favorable consideration for House Bill 131, the cyberbullying bill, and House Bill 115 by Mr. Mitchell, the right to cure.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I would like to ask for the House Bill 416 on page 3 under modified structure, the Consumer Information Awareness Act, the identifier bill. On page 1, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put my name next to House Bill 253, modified open rule. On page 4, under structured, I'd like to put my name next to House Bill 369. And 2 lines down is House Bill 457. And on page 3, under modified structure rule, House Bill 505.
And I'll come back tomorrow and ask you which one of those do you really, really, really want? as long as it ain't 460. Mr. Powell.
I would like to put my name by HB 169 and ask for favorable consideration.
Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 110 is just legalizes fireworks in the state of Georgia. I could go into a lot more detail, but
no,
you don't want me to.
No, you can't.
I understand.
You save your details for later on today.
Yeah, thank you. I got another fireworks bill today on the floor.
I used to play with fireworks. I can't imagine what's wrong with me. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got cut off. I was going to put my name also.
You're cut off. You're cut off. And it was not a mistake. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. There's an amendment on your desk. It is AM 340684 related to House Bill 170. An issue arose yesterday, and I'll attempt to stumble my way through it, that there are counties in the state, namely Cobb, Cherokee, Gwinnett, and Rockdale, to my knowledge, that don't have a lost or host, and of course under the bill the counties that do have such a mechanism end up having a reduction in local property taxes. The counties that do not have that would therefore be in the unfortunate position of being in a 24% excise rate without having that other tax benefit. And so what this proposed amendment does is to account for that penny, a penny and a quarter, I suppose, is to lower the excise rate at the gas pump from 24 to 21.5. And what this will do is establish parity between those jurisdictions with the others that do have a lost host, et cetera, that would go ahead and benefit otherwise by the substitute in its current form. I'd ask Mr. Chairman if Mr. Setzler, I think, can probably speak to the details better than I can, but that's essentially what the amendment does. I think what it'll end up doing is curing a lot of concern that members have at this point, that some members have regarding the amendment or regarding the issue.
Okay. All right. We're going to set it for Monday. Under modified open, HB 385. Any opposed? Under modified open, HB 386. Any opposed? Under modified structure, HB 212. Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 296. Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 353. Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 397. Any opposed? It's under structured, HB 492. Any opposed? Under modified structure, HB 110. Any opposed? Yeah, where's Sharon when you need her? I think that's plenty. My bad there. Mark, I said.
Turn it off.